So good morning, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you very much to NRM Regions Australia for the opportunity to talk to you today. I will, while Kate's given me a license to talk fairly sort of steadily through this, for those of you who may have come across my talking before, I could probably talk about natural capital accounting for a number of days. So I won't put you all through that, but partly as a result, this will be a relatively high level type of thing. And indeed, I'm probably much more interested in trying to answer the questions that you have, because often with natural capital and natural capital accounting, it's very difficult to understand exactly how to pitch things. So hopefully what gets presented today will at least give some food for thought, but more than happy to engage in an ongoing conversation about the topic and how it might be relevant for NRM organisations. So I think a starting point which we would come from is that we're on the understanding that NRM managers, you're managing natural capital as part of your work. You know the landscape, you can identify issues in the landscape, you can invest in solutions, and you can guide stakeholders. So that's something that you guys have been doing as standard practice and operating procedure for a long period of time now, no matter which part of Australia that you're in. The angle that we come from, and you come at from an accounting point of view, is how can you get that type of thinking and that approach to be more widely appreciated and implemented. And in actual fact, in that sort of vein, I just happened to see before we started that Helen Haynes in Canberra has just put in a motion into Parliament, which is essentially about the idea of promoting better practice around climate change, if I understood it rightly, and very much linking to the idea of the role of NRM Regions Australia and other sort of land care type of organisations. So this idea of we know a lot about what to do, but how can we get it more broadly scaled up is really, I think, one of the underlying motivations for doing accounting and natural capital accounting. So the next few slides are a quick overview of things, and this is certainly there is a lot of technical detail that sits under this that I'm more than happy to try and answer in the Q&A part of the discussion. So the starting point is that we have a definition of natural capital. This one is from a private sector initiative, largely the Natural Capital Protocol. It's from almost 7 years ago now. Natural capital is a stock of renewable and non-renewable natural resources that combine to yield a flow of benefits to people. And it really isn't, there are a range of different ways you can express the same idea. The reason I've taken that one is that it is a globally recognised definition in the sense of, and that notion of coming up with common language is hopefully a theme that comes through today. To really sort of lock in this idea of what's underpinning natural capital, it's not just a thing, it's not just the environment, it's a bit of a mindset question that you have a stock of natural capital, it generates some ecosystem services, a range of different things that the environment provides for us, which gives us benefits or values. But because sometimes we're not looking after these stocks as well as we might, we can think of lots of ways in which we can invest in those. And one of the current, I guess, buzz policy terms is nature-based solutions. There's nothing new about these in a sense, but they're sort of being brought in together through a whole range of different reasons. But this notion that you've got an investment loop, in effect, is also part of this notion of natural capital. That you're not just thinking about the fact that there's a relationship between people and the environment, but you're also got a mindset in natural capital that you're investing in the stocks in order to generate the flows and the values and benefits. So that mindset, I think, is important to keep in mind. So on the same sort of track, that's sort of what gets you to this accounting framing of this stocks and flows. So it's a pretty standard way of thinking about accounting. If you were doing financial accounting, that you would have your balance sheet and your profit and loss statement. In the same way, the core framework for natural capital accounting, which is coming here from the System of Environmental Economic Accounting from the UN, is coming out of this, looking at the stocks of the environment and looking at the flows. So with respect to stocks, we think about the extent of different assets, and in particular, we're focusing on ecosystems. So the extent or size of the assets, and then we're thinking about their condition, their ecological integrity, their health, different words for the same type of thing. But we're looking at it in a fairly holistic way as to the condition of the one way. If you're thinking about this, perhaps from the perspective of a more economic or produced capital perspective, you could think of the extent being the number of stories in a building, in an apartment building, or number of bedrooms in a house. And the condition might be an engineering report on its structural integrity and whether it was about to fall over or whether it wasn't. So that's your stock side of the story, and those stocks will underpin the flows. And the flows we separate into two parts: the services, which are the distinct things which in this case, the ecosystem stocks, they're the distinct role that the ecosystem plays, and those services contribute to benefits. So benefits might be health, they might be financial outcomes, employment, a whole range of things that can be listed as benefits. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the framework. And the accounting part is, in a sense, two things. One is that it gives you this framework of stocks and flows and allows you to speak meaningfully about the relationship between them and organize information about them. And then it's got this structured approach to tables and data and those types of things, which gives you a whole range of rules and practices for bringing all of the information together to present it in a common way. Now, in view of the time, I'm really only going to focus on one definition today, but there are a whole stack of definitions that sit here, which sit within this book here, the System of Environmental Economic Accounting, Ecosystem Accounting. It was adopted by the UN actually almost exactly 2 years ago, March 2021. I can't remember the exact date. I think it might have been the 7th or the 8th. So it was adopted by the UN Statistical Commission. So that's unanimous agreement across all 200 countries. There's work going on underway in many, many countries at the moment, including Australia. It's quite an active program of work, which has been steadily moving along for the last 5-8 years. But we're sort of fingers crossed, hoping there's some money coming forward in the next budget that might give it another kick along. But that's not all of the activity in Australia. A lot of the states have activities going on, and there'll be work going on at sort of sub-state level and different organisations, a lot of PhDs and university work as well. So within this document here gives you a set of concepts and definitions and a structure for organising information. At the heart of it are the notion of ecosystem assets. This definition of contiguous spaces of specific ecosystem type, such as a forest or a wetland or a cropland, grazing area, shrubland, desert. Each of those different types are characterised by a distinct set of biotic and abiotic components and the interactions between them. And that definition essentially comes from the Convention on Biological Diversity and its definition of an ecosystem. We've adapted that for sort of statistical purposes. And here's a sort of very stylized sort of version of a terrestrial ecosystem setting and a landscape where you've got a number of different things that are going on in here. What we're trying to then do is translate that, because we've got a lot of information about what's going on in this box, a lot of scientific information, economic information, social information. So how can we organize that in a meaningful way? So the starting point is to come up with what we would call I guess we're mapping out the extent of different ecosystems within a particular area. So we have an ecosystem accounting area, or EAA. That's that dark, thick line around the edge. That might be a property. It might be a catchment. It might be a state. It might be a country. So these ecosystem accounting areas can be of varying sizes. And within each of those, you're trying to then map out exhaustively and mutually exclusively all of these different ecosystem types. And this is more than happy to accept, it's very stylized. I mean, it's straight lines for a start, but which sort of speaks to my sort of skills on PowerPoint more than anything else. But we've got a lake, we've got 2 areas of cropland, an urban area here and an urban area up here, and a forest down the side. So yeah, it's very stylized, but hopefully gives you a sense of what we're starting from. And you could imagine that at property scale, this could work. At a catchment scale, it can work. That's sort of the most technical that I'm going to get, but obviously more than happy to talk in more detail. The key part here is that we end up with four main steps for working through a set of natural capital accounts. One is to do what I've just described there, is look at the ecosystems that you've got within your area, consider them as assets that you would invest in to generate benefits. So you're framing it up in that mindset. Map them out. So mapping and spatial context is really everything in ecosystem accounting. And it really then fits into other sort of areas of thinking like socio-ecological systems, anything to do with landscape scale type framings of things. Ecosystem accounting is a tool that works within that type of framing. But we're looking at location, type, size, configuration. So how things are organized within the landscape is particularly important. Once we've got that, that's your basis for putting your accounts together. You can then record the condition of each of those assets, look at the services that each of them provide, and then look at measuring and valuing the benefits. So yeah, those four steps, and there's obviously a lot of detail that sits within that. Part of the other story, and this links back to the framing part of accounting and the stocks and flows, is that accounts at the end of the day are a storytelling device. In the same way as a set of financial accounts will tell you the story of a company, not the whole story and the whole history, but it will tell you something, an important part about a company and how it's traveling over time from a financial point of view. The national accounts of a country, its GDP figures and related numbers, will tell you a story about that country's economic performance over time. And it works because you've got comparable information and a common language. And that in itself gets back to this notion of scaling and applying things more widely, is this completely, I think, underestimated role of accounting, of playing this the role of accounting in giving a common language. So when we talk about profits, when we talk about balance sheets, we talk about production and wages, those are things which could potentially be having hundreds of different definitions and everyone using different things. But we have come up with a set of standards, which means that people are using a similar type of thing. I mean, everyone, yeah. So what we want to try and do is then try and get environmental data and scientific data, management practice in that sort of environmental space up to a similar level of commonality. And that helps with communication. It helps you assess risks and opportunities. It's particularly important if you're trying to do things around environmental markets and you're trying to assure how things are going on and trust what sort of information is out there and what is actually happening. And then just trying to tell this story about the wider benefits of particular ecosystems and environments. So one of the challenges in the natural capital space has been that, not that the ideas have been poor, but that there's been a lot of people coming into it from a lot of different entry points. So as part of this, a small piece of work we've been doing with NRM Regions Australia over the last couple of months, we've tried to have a bit of a, because I guess we've been involved in it for a reasonable length of time now, how can we declutter this natural capital accounting space a little bit? Because there are a lot of things out there. And the way in which we've thought about doing this is to break things up into sort of four broad areas or components which are needed in order to take natural capital accounting forward. So I'll start here. I won't say it's the first thing necessarily that where you would necessarily start, but it's really, in our sense, and each of these are critical parts. So they're all linked here, but I'm going to start top left. Frameworks and standards. So this is things like the system of environmental economic accounting. You need to know what you're going to measure, and you need to have a common understanding of what you're measuring. So that when you say you're measuring an ecosystem asset, or you'll say you're measuring ecosystem services, that you know what it is that you're talking about. And that not just that you know, but that someone else can understand you. And they are measuring the same thing. So then you can compare results, exchange data, exchange experiences, develop platforms for doing things on a much larger scale. So there are a number of different frameworks and standards out there, and I'll get to that in a little bit more next few slides, each of these in more detail. Once you've got some concepts and definitions, you need some methods to be able to collect the data and transform that data. So, and a range of methods depending on what part of the story you're looking at, whether you're looking at the condition of an ecosystem, its size and how you would map that, whether you were looking at particular ecosystem services, whether you were valuing those services in monetary terms. So a range of different methods that are out there that you need. You'll need something in order to organize the data and bring it all together in some way, shape or form. You're not just looking at a single data set here. So the way in which you bring those together, often using spatial data sets, you'll need some tools and data platforms. You'll need to be able to source data from a whole range of different areas in order to bring that in to create a set of accounts. And the most common entry point at the end of the day, having a set of accounts is useless if no one's actually using them. And so this notion that there are out there a lot of entry points, which I've labeled here initiatives and applications, provides you a use case, a reason for making a connection about how you use accounting information to support a decision. So I'll keep working through each of those with a little bit more detail. And I should say, so Kate introduced these sort of information notes or information sheets, which will be posted shortly. One of those has been written very specifically on this topic of these four areas required for natural capital accounting. So yeah, some of this I've said before, but the reality is, and it's very obvious when you wander into the natural capital space, is that there are a lot of different definitions out there. And what we're trying to do increasingly, and there is an increasing demand for this, is actually a fairly standard. Don't tell us that there's 6 different definitions. Just give us one, and then we've got a chance to actually do something with it. So we're starting to see that drive forward. The UN SIA is certainly a very strong candidate at the moment to become an international standard in this space beyond the statistical world in which it started. And in particular, it's going to be, I think, one of the key things with the environment is that you're going to be dealing with data which is somewhat out of your control. So if you want to tell a story about your farm or your catchment, you're going to need something about what's happening in other catchments around you or other farms around you, in which case you can't just rely on your own information as you might for a set of financial accounts. So the role of government information and publicly sourced information will be critical. So in that respect, the government-led nature of the SIA and the fact that it's applicable at all scales conceptually will sort of sees it being as sort of a pretty strong candidate to become a more universal type of standard in this space. So we'll see how that develops, and but nonetheless, it is underpinning a lot of the thinking that's sitting in the SIA. Ecosystem accounting is underpinning the thinking in something like farming for the future, for example. The ecological balance sheets that have been developed by Sue Ogilvie and over the time have come from this same mindset of ecosystem accounting. Or been developed in concert with, I should probably a better way of framing that. So methods. They will be fundamental. It's often the starting point because people are looking for, well, what can I measure out there in the landscape and how can I do it? All of these methods have been around for quite a long period of time. I've just focused on a couple of areas here for ecosystem condition and then for measuring ecosystem services. It's very clearly a subset. You'll notice here one that's got a lot of press over the last 6 to 12 months, but has been in development for 10, 12, 15 years, accounting for nature. It is certainly one approach to measuring condition, one method for measuring condition, but there are many others. And indeed, when we were drafting the SIA, it wasn't a case of coming up with new methods, it was adapting existing methods. And I think that's really fundamental to see that, in a way, accounting is a bit of a bowerbird, wanting to go out and pick stuff up, or magpie, or whatever analogy we want to use, of collecting stuff together and using it for its own purposes. So all of these methods for modelling water, for timber growth, crop growth, for measuring carbon have been developed independently of accounting. And accounting is then taking those and bringing those in. Well, how can we use those to actually fill in the boxes that we've created to measure stocks and flows? A number of tools and platforms out there for geospatial data. QGIS and ArcGIS are certainly two of the sort of basic standard software that you would use for manipulating geospatial data. There's an Australian developed tool called Flint Pro for organising information and running models. One that we have, which is an idea group development, originally Victorian government, but now us, Data for Nature, does a similar type of thing of bringing information together and running models from that. There's one being developed internationally for the same thing, Aries, developed out of Spain and the US together. Invest is a modelling platform for ecosystem services. And then you've got these data sources. The New South Wales government SEED, Queensland government has Globe. I think the federal government is thinking of coming up with one as well. And there are probably equivalents in other places. So the one thing that we have found in working on natural capital accounting for the last 12 years or so, there's no lack of data. There is an incredible amount of data. In actual fact, the challenge is sifting through it and identifying how it is that you're going to use it. Many times people are imagining that the problem is data and that there's a lack of it. And I mean, I would certainly agree that there are more data that we could find and we could measure better and all of those types of things. But the barrier to progress here and the barrier to scaling up is not a lack of data as things stand. And then finally, these initiatives and applications. And I think this is really the most common entry point. Normally, you'll hear about something like Farming for the Future, Accounting for Nature. Climate Works is doing some work on a natural capital investment initiative. And so you hear about those and wonder how they all connect together. I'll just go on to the next slide as well. Here's some other ones that are more global, I guess. A big one at the moment is the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, TNFD. There's a range of what I've called advocacy approaches for TEEB, which has been around for, again, 12, 15 years. IPBES is a more sort of intergovernmental type of approach. There's various reporting types of things at corporate level, the Global Reporting Initiative, ESG reporting. There's some work, there's a new International Sustainability Standards Board that's part of the accounting community of standard setters. And there's environmental markets. So these are all entry points for people to say, well, this is what I want to use the information for. And the role of accounting is essentially then to play a coordination type of role. So key messages out of that train of thought. There is fundamentally, natural capital, I think, is powerful because it sees nature as an asset. And that becomes, it's not a cost, it's an investment. And that transition from a cost to an investment is really quite fundamental. It also just supports the way in which economists would normally, and financiers would normally think about the world and what they do. They're investing in buildings, they're investing in roads, they're investing in a whole range of things. And seeing the environment as something you invest in is really a key part of that natural capital, and allows you to sort of bring this environmental information and link economy and environment together, very much in a mindset of ecological economics. But we've had all of these different entry points. I perhaps in that last 10 minutes haven't solved the problem of the reality is there are a lot of entry points. But how do we think about aligning them? The main thing, I guess, I haven't said it yet, but they're not all competing. What we do have is a sense that there are a lot of initiatives out there that we can place in a particular home. And they all play a role. So that's, unless we can get through this challenge of identifying the connections and the fact that a lot of different pieces need to play together, we're going to find it difficult to get this ongoing comparable information that we're looking for to get the consistency in describing our relationship with the environment, which is at the heart of the natural capital accounting approach. So bringing it back finally to NRM organisations, what we're really looking at is natural capital storytelling. I think at the end of the day, how do we collect and present data to tell that story? We want to try and do that in a way that applies accounting standards and practices to get that consistency over time, which means you're not coming out with one-off reports, which people think are wonderful, but then they can't compare it to what they had before, and they have to compare, how do I compare this report to a report from someone else? Those types of things. We're trying to get over that hurdle. As part of that, we're going to be able to do comparability across location. So certainly every location will be different, but if we can organize the information about each of those locations in a consistent way, then we can start to build up comparability. It should allow us quite a lot of efficiencies in data management. There's an awful lot of data swimming around out there, or we're swimming in an awful lot of data. How do we try and find our way through that we can make that a little bit better and identify where the real gaps are, so that we can do the better measurement in places where it actually will make a real difference to decision making. Linked to that is this idea of collecting once and telling the story many times. So all of those different applications like risk assessment, advocacy, reporting, environmental markets, if you're talking about one area, one property, one catchment, it should be the same, basically the same set of information for that catchment that you're using in multiple ways. And if each of those applications is using a different version of reality, then the chances are we're going to have a real struggle to work things through. So this collecting once, telling the story many times is really quite fundamental. And that just goes to this point of connecting to many applications. So you're not investing in information separately each time for environmental markets, for risk assessments, in investment analysis, or any other form of application that you might think of. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I very much look forward to the questions. I've probably wandered on a little bit long there, Kate, but I'm more than happy to see what people have got to say. Thanks.